Welcome.
Hello.
Brandon's doing a dramatic entrance.
I'm putting on
a sweater.
A sweater because that makes me look more professional than just wearing the t-shirt without a sweater on top of it.
Well, my turquoise necklace and my glasses and my scarf and my blazer make me look more professional.
It's true.
Anyway.
Sartorial is a word that, for so long I thought of as a philosophical term or whatever. Mm-hmm. It just, I don't know how many times it had to be pointed out to me that it just is meaning like referring to fashion and dress and whatever before it finally stuck. But yeah, sartorial language is a thing.
I think there was a blog, The Sartorialist, that I used to follow. But welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour.
Welcome to the This Is Not Therapy Hour.
We've already demonstrated therapy.
It. I am Brandon Tesser.
I'm Caitlin Miller.
We are both licensed therapists, but this is not therapy for so very, very, very many
reasons.
We both work with a practice called Effective Artistry. Our office is in Northbrook, Illinois. We do individual, couples, and family therapy for people in the state of Illinois. We also work with a few executive functioning coaches who can work with people all over the world over the internet. We do therapy with people remotely, but only if they're within the state of Illinois. We can do it online.
And hopefully it'll change over the next few years, but
eventually it'll change for sure.
Yeah.
But who knows when.
The change is gonna come, as Sam Cooke once said. It's one of my favorite songs.
This is not therapy. It is just an open conversation. As you're already seeing, Caitlin and I will be talking about whatever we're talking about. And those of you who are here, we're going to be in the same way that when I'm talking to Caitlin, my ideas of what Caitlin will interpret and what she's interested in and whatever inform what I say. Same with you all here. Our ideas of who you are, what you might be interested, how you will interpret things informs what we say. For those of you who are here and participate in the chat, actually write things, that gives us a lot more information to go off of about who you are, what you're interested in, and so on. So we love that, and we appreciate it when people participate in the chat. But either way, we're doing our best. And it is just an open conversation. We'll go where we go. Same way that we influence each other and we respond to each other, same with you. So we'll start by talking about something. We'll be discussing some topic, but we don't need to stick on that topic. One moment. I forgot to switch my sign on my door to say, in session, please do not disturb. And I didn't want to put somebody on live stream on the internet that wasn't aware or prepared for that. That's why I opened it so secretly. Anyway, yeah, we're here to talk about whatever. You don't need to stay on the topic that we're discussing if you have thoughts or questions or want to discuss something.
We love comments, including divergent comments.
It's public. That's one of the reasons it's not therapy, one of the many. So keep that in mind, that anyone on the internet can view this and it will stick around as a video on demand later. But yeah, we welcome interaction and participation.
Yeah.
I think that's it. Yeah. Welcome. How are you?
Welcome, Brandon. I'm doing well. Yeah. How are you, Brandon Bridge Tessers?
I'm good. Had a good weekend. Yeah, excited to be here. What's been on your mind lately?
Apparently there are cicadas that are going to come out every
17 years.
Is it 17? I thought it was 100.
No, there's.
Watch the replays. Oh.
Yeah, I
like that.
That's
so sweet. Thank you.
Watch the replays of your live stream. Makes me calm and fall asleep to it. I've actually.
You're technically a hypnotist, so that makes sense.
Well, by the definition I use, we're all hypnotists. But I have actually in the past, when people are struggling to sleep, recommended they listen to a podcast that I've been on or whatever, because it's just easy to kind of calm down.
Maybe we could do story time with Brandon. We could do a podcast series for kids or adults saying like, and then the prince went into the forest and he enjoyed his time in the forest.
It's not just the tone of voice, although obviously like I do have a deeper voice and I deliberately allow it to be. So Caitlin has a background as an opera singer.
I guess. Yeah.
I guess. You only studied it professionally.
Yeah.
Like we're a professional opera singer for some amount of time.
And you.
And I have a background as an actor and
I'm so
singer
surprised.
and whatever. Yeah, this is not new information. I'm just reminding anyone.
No, I know. It's funny.
And so we both have like a lot more experience and awareness and training than the average person does about the voice, the human voice, our own, but also how it works in general, whatever.
Yeah.
And the resonance that my like typical speech, like right now, has, like I speak what we will refer to as back in the throat, as opposed to being nasal. When I'm on stage, I do like vocal warm-ups to bring my voice forward.
Really?
Yeah, in order to fill the space better, because this way of speaking, the sound waves carry and they go through obstruction fairly well. Like you'll hear boom, 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 like through a wall.
Yeah.
But they lose crispness very quickly. So if I'm speaking like this on a stage in a like large theater, the people in the back row have a hard time understanding. So I have to, and I can't just switch into it without like doing all the warm-ups, but I have to switch into the place where I'm speaking, even though it's the same pitch, the like nasality is coming out. Anyway, I made a specific choice to not do that before streams and podcasts and let it be back in the throat like this, partly because it is more rumbly and soothing to people.
Yeah.
Anyway, the voice is part of it, but the other key is about attention. You have to, what is my preferred toilet paper wiping technique for maximum creative artistry? It's not something I have considered before. Couldn't tell you. But yeah, it's making something attention grabbing enough to keep people's minds from wandering onto other things which might like become problematic or keep them, awake or whatever. Without being so, no, it's not a matter of not being attention grabbing, but while structuring it in a way where it feels like it's okay to just tap out at any point. You don't have to hear it all.
You actually consciously thought of this. That's so cool. When did that start in your therapy career? Because that's
I don't know that that's something I would associate with therapy in particular.
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying how it was affected within therapy. You didn't say that, but that's
it's a communication
thing. Interesting.
It certainly does impact my therapy. I just don't know that I like that it originated there.
I feel like it's really great for therapy.
Well, the thing is that, as we've talked about, nobody hears every word that another person says. Nobody even hears every word that they themselves say. And when people feel like it's important to understand everything, it becomes very stressful and draining as like more and more of your attention is going to try and get more and more information about what is being said. And that's fine as long as the failure condition isn't like bad. Meaning, what we're trying to do is make it so that the information is useful, valuable, or at least potentially valuable, seems like it might be valuable, without making it so that not getting the information is scary or harmful. Yeah. Because that's what brings up vigilance and it's panic and whatever. So I do deliberately talk the way that I talk. I, jumping from one topic to the next and covering a million different things and whatever, because the theory is if I offer 100 different things and you only remember 2 of them, well, your processes are going to select from among the 100 different things which were offered to select the 2 which seem most relevant to you, most useful to you. If I'm only offering one thing and really just driving home that one thing, the likelihood that everyone I'm talking to remembers that one thing is much higher than the likelihood of them remembering any one thing when I'm discussing a bunch of stuff. But also, if that one thing isn't of interest or use to you, it's just a waste of your time. So I jump around
That's
all over
really
the place.
interesting. This is explaining things.
And that's also why because you can't do that artificially. Like if I were just jump onto 100 different topics without like any input from the other person, it's just random.
Wait, this isn't a new rule? What?
I don't know. But it's just the way normal conversations work, right? Like I say something, you say something, wherever we go is wherever we go. And then again, the likelihood that we end up discussing things which are of use, not only of use, but also that you hear and retain is much higher if we do it like that than if I keep saying like, that's off the point. Let's come back to the main thing we're supposed to discuss. Lecture is like the least efficient way of getting information from one human to another human. Spoken lecture is the least efficient. What?
I was just thinking about the Alan Watts lectures that I've been listening to and how lovely they are, and I'm like, I'm probably not remembering any of it. And then I was like, memory versus retaining versus belief versus tone versus.
Well, and efficiency is not the end all be all of communication.
Yeah.
There are other reasons to communicate besides like efficiency of how much information I can relate as quickly as possible.
And I like having some communication in my life that's one way where it's just I'm taking in what I take in.
Yeah, lecture asks the least of the person listening to the lecture. Like it's the easiest and least costly. You can just sit there, and if you're not listening to anything, it won't impact anything, and it's not a problem. So you could zone out completely.
Yeah.
Or as I used to do when I was in high school, my hair used to be more like down to the sides, like this was more like how. And so sometimes I would just get it a little bit further in and just sleep.
Really?
No one can see my eyes well enough to tell if I'm asleep.
You would sleep?
Oh, I slept in school a lot.
Interesting.
High school.
Did you still have a delayed circadian rhythm?
I've always been a night owl, if that's what you mean. Circadian rhythm can't be delayed.
Oh, that's such a good point. Thank you.
There is something called delayed sleep onset disorder, which I reference.
I swear my mind just like melts different Crayola crayons, and then they just are like all my crayons are like tie-dye now.
Language. It's language.
Yeah.
Different pieces of language that just get whenever, and this is something we all do all the time. So this is not a criticism or something, but whenever somebody says something and you're like, so basically, or so that means, right? Like translating it into something else. What you take away is what you translated it into, not what was actually stated.
Yeah.
And so the more that you can translate like 15 different things to all basically mean this one thing, means that those 15 different things don't have much difference between them to you, because they all basically mean this one thing. So they all become that one thing. That's one of the downsides of being intelligent is intelligence is largely about pattern recognition, especially as mediated through language. Intelligent people, like the more intelligent someone is, quote unquote, we're talking about the way our culture not the way our culture discusses it broadly, but the way that like when people are talking about IQ or intelligence as like an actual measurable trait, we're talking about things like pattern recognition, data extrapolation, that kind of stuff. And the more you do that, the more it's about taking one thing and connecting it to the other thing. And now these two things aren't different. They're just both examples of this one similar thing. So yes, the more that you do that, the more prone a person becomes to just all these different things get treated as the same thing. It's a big, big part of our work. Of what people struggle with and etc. Anyway, I don't remember what we were talking about.
Sleeping in class, attention, lecture, one-way communication. Delayed circadian rhythm, but then delayed sleep onset disorder.
Yeah, there is delayed sleep onset disorder.
Are you saying I was just a night owl or something?
Well, I use delayed sleep onset disorder as a great way to illustrate what disorders are. because disorders are not diseases. Like
Mhm.
they're categorically different things. That's why they're called disorders, not diseases. It's not a hierarchical thing that like diseases are more real or more important. It's that they're two different things. You know, like trees are not more important than cars. They're not like, they don't exist on a hierarchical scale. They're just different things.
Mhm.
And disorders, in order for us to label something as a disorder or some disorderly conduct, disorderly behavior, disordered experiences, disordered eating, whatever, first we have to identify what we say is orderly. And then anything which is not that is disordered. So a nice way to make this point is that there is in the DSM, the same book which makes, you know, major depressive disorder and all these other things, the thing which identifies and makes these into actual formal things that exist in our medical system. There's something called delayed sleep phase disorder, or just delayed sleep onset disorder. And the criteria is that a person regularly falls asleep 2 or more hours after is considered culturally normal. So like very clearly in the criteria there identifies that like what everyone else in the culture is doing is an important part of labeling something as a disorder or not. Because if you go to sleep at 2 a.m. and wake up at 10 a.m., if everyone in your culture does that, then we don't call that a disorder. But if most people in your culture go to sleep at 10 and wake up at 6 and you sleep from 2 to 10, now it's a disorder. Disorders are only labeled in opposition to orderly, quote unquote, orderly behavior. So that's the best one, I think, to illustrate that point to people. That it's not a label about what the person is experiencing. It's a label about what they're experiencing in the way that it compares to what most people around them experience. Which, yeah, raises some interesting philosophical questions like, if there was theoretically a point at which we were diagnosing more than 50% of the population as being depressed, then could we still call that a disorder? And
then I was thinking if we lumped in generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, and I don't know, just those two at this point, I don't know. And then I was going to use the word epidemic, but then it's not an epidemic because it's disorders.
Yeah, well, I mean, epidemic is a word that often gets used to refer to things which aren't diseases. You know, we can say that there's like like sometimes people will actually say is that there's a bad sleep epidemic, right? That like everyone seems to be struggling with poor sleep kind of thing.
And then I was going to make some joke about is order capitalism, but then
capitalism is an economic theory.
What would be can you give me a different word to use for what I'm trying to communicate? Because I feel like there's a more specific
about
word.
What?
When I make capitalism jokes, I feel like a lot of people make them.
Oh yeah, but I don't know. It depends on. A lot of the time people are just referring to inequality and calling it capitalism. And capitalism does like breed inequality. I don't know. Depends on the joke, I guess.
I guess I was thinking about like the conditions of a country that could make it that people often experience anxiety or depression.
Oh, well, I mean, you could certainly argue that capitalism contributes to structuring things in that way, for sure. I mean, I would argue that. But, all right, so just in the last few years, there was a lot of debate. I'm a capitalist and I sleep an average of 8 hours nightly. That's my dad.
I love that so much.
And you are not a capitalist. I happen to know this about you. Capitalist has a specific definition. A capitalist means a person who invests capital into some endeavor with the intent of gaining, with the belief of gaining return on that investment.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone who owns stocks is a capitalist. Anyone who has like loaned money to someone and collects it with interest is a capitalist.
Mm-hmm.
But believing in or supporting capitalism does not make you a
said I believe
capitalist.
in capitalism.
Yeah, that's fine. I do not. Because another big mistake that people make is equating capitalism with a free market economy. And those are different things. There are other versions of free market that doesn't require capitalism. Capitalism is a belief about that the excess value generated by an endeavor belongs to the person who provided the capital, as opposed to the people who provided the labor or any other element.
I read that.
Even though we have to.
Oh no, you're surrounded on the internet and in your office, Brandon.
Okay, so this is what I was saying. Within the past few years, this became very relevant because there's been a lot of exploration, and I don't have all the details, around adding prolonged grief as a disorder to the DSM.
Oh.
So,
yeah.
Like when Freud, not that he's the be all end all, but he originated a lot of this stuff.
He was the OG.
When Freud was originally defining neurosis, he specifically referenced grief as an example of something that isn't neurosis. You know, that neurosis isn't just experiencing emotional or cognitive distress.
Mm-hmm.
It's experiencing distress of a certain kind and whatever.
Yeah.
Because it is natural and normal. All people experience distress to some extent, and grief was his big example.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be hard to find anybody who would argue that feeling grief when a loved one dies is disordered, like unhealthy or
was
whatever.
That part of Freud's point about neurosis, that grief is not neurosis?
No, he was just using it as a way to like establish, like in talking about what are the criteria that makes something neurosis. What does neurosis mean?
Okay.
It's not just distress. And he was using that as an example of here's something that feels emotionally terrible, but isn't neurosis.
Okay.
It's a comment from my dad. I believe that to be true. However, with a high social conscience, I would use Brandon's model of taking care of employees first, but that is the business owner's choice. There's a lot of stuff there. I'm not trying to be dismissive by this. I'm just trying to like finish this point.
Mm-hmm.
So the argument then is that some people are putting forward that like, while grief is normal and healthy and therefore not disordered, that there can be a version of experienced grief which is disordered. And in particular, and so then there was all this work of people trying to look at in what way could we define like this grief is now a disordered experience of grief. And there were people who were arguing that this should not be done at all, that like grief can last as long as it lasts and impact however it impacts, and at no point is it ever a disorder. No one was making the argument that grief is always disordered, right? And genuinely, I don't actually remember where it ended up, like what was added, or I believe in the UK they made some determination. And there
is like complicated or complex grief or something?
I don't remember. I have to look it up.
Or maybe
but
that's just complex.
Just making the point of like there are vigorous debates around what is disordered and what isn't. And then we just kind of settle on like there is no disorder that is labeled or identified or categorized that is 100% of all people agree that it not only should be categorized the way that it is, but that it should be categorized at all.
It's called prolonged grief disorder in the DSM-5.
So it did get added to the DSM-5. So there is now, and it was only within the last year or two, there is now prolonged grief disorder has been added to the DSM-5. So again, just pointing out to people that these things are not diseases. They can't be, which doesn't mean that there's no biological component. There might be, but it definitely means there's more than just a biological component. It could be that there's none, I guess, depending on the disorder you're talking about. But it can't be that it's all biological, the way that diseases are. Anyway, I don't remember why I wanted to clarify that. I just wanted to point out to people that like different conceptualizations of what is normal, what is healthy, what is proportionate, what is reasonable, what is appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Like there are literally groups of people who have these conversations and have votes and end up with what those groups of people have settled on as the definition of what we're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
Honestly, like this whole thing, the DSM, disorders, whatever, has a lot more in common with law than it does with medicine. If that makes sense. It's a lot more.
Tell me more. How does it have a lot more in common with law? Or I can tell you what I'm guessing.
I don't know. You can say whatever.
Is it sort of like with breaking the law, there's some level of like discernment and gray area in the determination of if something has been done and what the consequence would be, and then in that way there's a gray area and a determination with mental disorders? I don't know.
No, I mean,
tell me your connection.
I mean that the law is a thing which is constructed by people.
Mm-hmm.
If it were not constructed by people, it would not exist. It's not a thing that exists that we then observe and label and try to understand.
Yeah.
It's a thing that we create. Medicine as a field is the things that we call medicine exist regardless of whether we call it that or think of it that way or whatever. We're just observing things that are already happening and doing our best to understand them, predict them, label them, interact with them, whatever. But law, we're just making it up. And some people, like different people, have different levels of ability to influence how that law is constructed, how it is interpreted, how it is enforced, how it, and it changes over time because it is constructed by people. As people change, it changes over time. And yes, in both cases, like a word that is all over the American Legal Code is reasonable, which is not quantifiable. That's why the whole thing is structured the way that it is, right? That judges, people, get to ultimately be the people who interpret and enforce, like decide what applies in what way. Because reasonable is not quantifiable. Reasonable means, do you believe that most people would agree with this thing?
I think I was thinking of interpretation then, in like the one person goes to a psychiatrist and reports the same symptoms, and then a second psychiatrist reports the same symptoms, and then psychiatrists determine different disorders based off of their interpretation.
Well, sure, but that can happen in medicine too, right? Like two different doctors can give different diagnoses or make different recommendations. In fact, psychiatrists are medical doctors. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about like if you find cancer in someone's brain, I don't think there would be like a doctor who would say there's not cancer, right?
In theory, correct, right? Like in theory, there is a quantifiable definition of what cancer is, and what exists there either is or is not cancer. In practice, though, yeah, some doctors would say like, I don't think that's cancerous, or like,
but because it does,
they could be wrong.
Yeah,
and that's the difference, is that like, in medicine, if two different doctors, if one says this is diabetes and one says it isn't, we can then run a test and like do some follow-up and determine whether it is or is not. Whether it is or is not is independent of whether the doctor thinks that it is or is not.
Okay. Yeah.
But with disorders, that doesn't happen. There's not a way to say that it is true, even if all the diagnosticians are saying that it isn't, or vice versa. If all the diagnosticians say it is true that you have whatever, then we can't say that that's inaccurate. We can in practical, like we can disagree and whatever, but as the way that the system is structured, it's not, disorders don't reference something objective and empirical. So in the same way that reasonable is all over the legal code, in the DSM, it is riddled with the word significant. Like every disorder has criteria that says a significant blah, 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 or blah, blah, to a significant extent. what is considered significant or not, just like what is considered reasonable or not, is not an objective thing. It is based on all kinds of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not, we can't quantify it as like, this is significant and this is not, in some way that all people would agree with.
Yeah. That's helpful.
Just these things are so useful. I talk about like, because I understand that people will often, when I'm saying these things, people will often interpret it to mean that what I'm saying is that disorders aren't real and the DSM is bullcrap and et cetera, et cetera. That is not the case. I think that these things are real and they are valid and useful tools.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just trying to point out what the tool is and what it is meant to be used for. Because like if someone's trying to like cut a piece of wood in half with a shovel, I'm going to point out like that's not a great idea. That's not what that tool is for. I could show you like evidence to support what I'm telling you, that that tool is not meant for that thing. That doesn't mean that I'm saying a shovel is a bad tool. It's a very useful tool as long as you use it for what it is meant to be used for. So disorders are real and DSM is a useful tool, but people frequently use them for things that they're not meant for, and it causes problems the same way that it would cause a problem if you try to cut a piece of wood with a shovel.
What sort of things do people frequently?
Mostly that people frequently think of disorders as diseases, and that's the big problem. That they believe that. So I'm trying not to use like jargony terms, but whatever. Two big differences. Like, number one, the thing that makes a disease is that there's what's called a pathophysiology. Like, we can observe the mechanism of the disease, not just the symptoms of it, but we can see the thing that is happening that results in the symptoms. The flu isn't just vomiting and fever and whatever. The flu is a virus that exists in your blood and we can see it. It results in those things, but that's not what the flu is. Those are flu symptoms. The like brief way of putting it is, in order for something to be a disease, it has to be observable in a corpse. Because disorders deal with experience, conscious experience, including like emotions, perceptions, thoughts, etc., and behavior. Those things can't be observed in a corpse. So all we're doing is we're identifying symptoms. So the equivalent would be like if instead of calling it the flu, we were just like, oh, you have throwing up and fever and chills disease. Like we're just labeling it by the symptoms that you're experiencing. So we don't know why those symptoms happen. That's a big one. People think that labeling something as a disorder is the same as talking about why the symptoms occur. We're labeling the symptoms, not explaining them. You are not feeling depressed because you have major depressive disorder. We can identify and label what you're experiencing as major depressive disorder because you are feeling depressed.
How would you I don't want to.
So that's a big one, is we don't know why these things are happening. We have lots of theories and even lots of like research and evidence that give suggestions of factors, variables, components, but we can never say all the reasons, because behavior and experience and all these things change based on the context. A disease is internal to the person's body, right? Like a disease is occurring in your form, in your physical body. A disorder is a result of an interaction between your body and your environment, the context. So we can't even say, I could take someone that we would all identify comfortably as not having depression, right? And by changing their life enough in certain ways, they would now be experiencing things that meet our definition of depression. And so now they have depression. Same person, different context. And that's not to say that the person doesn't matter at all. Obviously, we're different and we respond differently.
Yeah.
And there's so much evidence that biological things impact all this. But that's the other major misconception, is not only that we know why these things are happening, but that specifically these things are happening because of a person's biology, that their brain is wired incorrectly or whatever that is. That's just the way people talk about it. That's not an actual piece of knowledge that we have. It can't be. It doesn't mean that biological interventions aren't useful. They are. Demonstrably, they are, or at least can be, right? Like a person can take a pill which helps with the symptoms. So I'm not invalidating that. It just means that it's a different thing. Anyway, what are you thinking?
I'm thinking so many things and I don't know where to start.
Whatever. I just feel like I'm running on. I'd rather hear about what you're thinking.
Oh, well, I was watching a podcast and they're a stream, not just whatever. Okay, anyway, skipping over details. I was watching it and there was a doctor who talks about how he wants to help end mental illness. And it was interesting because I'm looking back and from what I remember, he didn't say something like, oh, firing this way in your brain or more of this in your brain causes anxiety or causes depression. But he was talking about it in a way that, I think most people would assume that's what he was saying, but he was tiptoeing around it. And I think he was making interesting and valid points. And I was like, ooh, someone's saying he's wanting to end the concept of mental illness. And he was saying he wants to frame it as brain health and actual interventions you can do to improve your physical brain and your physical body. But then I feel like he must know that his meta communication is, hey, there are these things you can do to make your body be healthier in his definition of healthy that will get rid of your depression or anxiety or whatever, but without saying it in a way that's oh, if you do this thing, it's going to work. And so it was just interesting to kind of watch him dance around it. And I was like, I feel like he was making a point that I respected, but in a way that was a little off and a little bit I have a magic solution for you. But it was provocative to me because I resonate in some way with the phrase, let's end mental illness or something like that. So, and then I was like, how does that intersect with neurodiversity and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
So then I was like, maybe a more integrated way is let's try different things, but then let's try, I don't know. That's why I was like, I don't even know how to talk about this on the stream.
Well,
because there's so many different layers of it that I was like, I don't know what I'd want to bring up with Brandon because.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you putting out your thoughts and then I just respond to whatever I respond to. Mm-hmm. If you go back and if someone were to go back and rewatch this from the beginning, they'll notice that I very specifically did not ever say mental illness.
Oh yeah.
Or mental health. Those are both phrases that I avoid.
Mm-hmm.
Because they both reinforce the mistaken idea that people have that this is medicine, that illness and health are medical terms, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And also because of the impression they give, not just that this is diseases and whatever, but about how to predict what's going to happen next.
Mm-hmm.
Health is a wonderful thing to pay attention to. And I am personally very grateful that we have, as a species, that we have had so many people invest so many resources into the field of medicine and exploration of health and all that. Mm-hmm. A lot of this just has to do with the fact that things which are true and useful and very valuable on a large scale don't translate across to an individual person's experience, right?
Yeah, sorry. Go
ahead.
I was thinking, I'm wondering what you think about this, Brandon, to trying to be really careful with the way I use language. this is a thing that we could experiment with on the menu of things we could experiment with. Do you want to experiment with this? If so, how would we implement it? And then with we're going to try this and we don't know what's going to happen.
Right. Well, so that's the thing is even in medicine, that's how an individual person's experience works, right? Like, even though in medicine we can do these studies and develop interventions that have an 80% success rate, still when an individual person goes to their doctor or whatever, it's still going to be, we're going to start by trying this because this seems to be, like,
is that a way that you would find would be useful to talk about interventions in therapy?
Yes, because it's the same thing as an individual person, right?
Yeah.
Now, the means by which you come up with what thing we're going to try is different because it's not medicine. But that should still be the idea is, okay, I'm getting information about you and what you're experiencing, and here are some things that seem worth exploring and trying, and we're going to try things and we're going to see what happens, and if things are improving, then we'll keep moving forward, and if things aren't improving, we'll try something different.
Yeah, and usually I wait to offer specific ideas, not like solutions, but ideas until the person feels as though they have exhausted their own ideas and we've explored those enough. I don't know your thoughts on that. But
ideas for like a specific intervention?
Yeah, like I'm
having a specific thing to try.
Yeah, like I'm having problem X and I've tried this and this and this. Okay, are you interested in trying? What else are you interested in? Oh, well, actually, let me try this, like my idea. And then I feel like the way I'm using language today is so vague. I'm sorry. And then getting to a place where they're like, what do you think? I know you're having to do a lot of translating.
No, I just heard, I think that's a tornado siren. That's why I looked the other way.
Oh. Should but we it's get no. In
I don't know. I feel fine. I'm not concerned. I just heard a sound. And
it does sound like one, but I don't
what were you saying?
No, just a thunderstorm.
You'll explore what they're thinking first and then what you're thinking?
Yeah, like, if they come in with a problem in therapy and they say, I'm trying to fix this is how I've tried to fix it hasn't worked, and then trying to start with them leading the brainstorming process and then eventually bringing in my own ideas if it feels like it. But then I was getting stuck talking about it because I feel like that's too oversimplified.
Well, I don't know about simplified, but generalized, like in a way that we can't be specific about. And so, yes, it depends on a lot of things, but still, I think it's a useful thing. It's prompting something in me to share something that's useful. So it doesn't need to be that it's like praised. Anyway, here's the difference, or one of the, some of the other reasons I don't like concepts like mental illness, mental health, that language, not the concept per se, but the language that's used for it, is not only does it reinforce that the idea these things are diseases and that this is medicine, which isn't true, those are also binary things. Things are either healthy or unhealthy, you are ill or you are well. And it also reinforces that the binary state of wellness is the default one.
Yeah.
Because that's how medicine works, is you're ill, you go to the doctor, you figure out what the illness is, you address it, you get back to normal default state, which is health. Which is not what our work is. You don't go to see a therapist because you're ill and it's just some temporary thing we need to identify and eliminate it, and you get back to your default state of happiness. That's not how it works, but reinforcing that that's how it works makes it worse for everybody. When you tell people that the default state is being happy and content, then anytime a person is not happy, sad, angry, whatever, they're going to look at that and say, something's wrong. What's wrong?
Yeah.
So one of the big things that's different between therapy and medicine, like I identified, is that the things outside of a person impact their experience, their perception, their thoughts, their emotions, their behavior
Mhm.
Where in medicine, it's only the things inside. Like all medical interventions are doing something to your body
Mhm.
because only the things inside the body can do anything. But no one would argue with this idea. Can we take somebody who is having a great day and just happy and having a good time, put them in a room to interact with somebody else for an hour, and if that person does certain things, it can just piss them off or make them sad and ruin their day, and they're not happy anymore? Everyone understands that and agrees with that. Then the corollary, can we take somebody who is sad or angry or having a crap day,
Mhm.
put them in a room with somebody for an hour, and based on what that person does or says or how they interact, then now all of a sudden they're doing fine and they're feeling happy and they're having a good day.
Mhm.
So when we're talking about therapeutic interventions, some of those fall under the category, which it seems like where you're talking about, which is like we're talking about the content of some issue in their daily life, and we're coming up with ideas about things they can try or changes to be made in how they think, how they act, how they communicate, whatever, that will make things better. That's interventions that are worth exploring. But there's a whole nother set of interventions which are just what it is we're doing in the room in order to try and impact things in the way that the client has identified that they want things to go. And that second one is not a thing that the client has ideas about.
By what we're doing in the room, do you mean us,
like
the
what
therapist?
we are saying, what we are, how we're behaving and communicating and whatever, right? Like, so you're talking about the first thing where it's like, if I try this kind of app for this thing, it'll help me with this way. Or if I try medicine, which we don't obviously prescribe medicine, but we refer people on to psychiatrists or whatever, or whatever, then yeah, we want to explore clients' ideas. I wouldn't necessarily say it always has to be we explore all their ideas first before giving any thoughts or suggestions. It's a process of what we do together. And sometimes exploring thoughts is just talking it through. Like I have a thought, we talk it through, they point out, oh, that wouldn't be helpful because of whatever. Okay, cool. And same vice versa, that they'll have a thought and I say, I don't know that that'll be helpful because of whatever. But to me, the more important part of therapy, like that's one of the things that leads people to say, like, I don't want to go to therapy, I just want to talk to my friends or family or whatever, is because they're focused on that element of it, of like getting ideas. And yeah, you can get ideas from anyone. And therapists, especially if they're specialized in certain things, might be a better, like more efficient source of ideas for something because they have more knowledge and experience around it. But we're not fundamentally different from, like, other people might have ideas that would help you too.
Oh yeah.
It's the other part of it where therapy is unique, which is what's happening in the room. And again, so much of all of these things that we're thinking about is informed by this hyper individualism thing, this idea that what is internal to a person, what is contained within a person, is the thing that dictates what happens in their life, including the idea, I can definitively say that seeing a therapist is unique and offers the potential, at least, for things that no other thing does. And that is not a statement about therapists being uniquely qualified for a thing or whatever. It is not a comparison of what the therapist knows or what they do or whatever. It's because the therapy relationship is a specific relationship that is structured in a specific way, and you cannot have that outside of the context of therapy by definition, right? What we have defined as therapy is something that can only happen in the context of what we've defined as therapy. It's what we say that it is. But some of those things are very, very unlikely to ever happen in a person's day-to-day life. Like, for example, it's a contractual relationship that there is a mutual.
I have a contract with my best friend, Brandon. What are you talking about?
There is, at the outset, there is a discussion between both people about what this is, what's the frame surrounding it, etc. So we're entering into it, for example, with the agreement that what we are both here to do is to focus on the client and their experience and doing everything that we both can do to improve their experience.
Mm-hmm.
Tons of stuff happens in therapy that improves my experience as the therapist too, but that's not what we're aiming at or focused on.
Yeah.
That's part of the reason that some form of payment is kind of required. And we can have another kind of conversation about payment and how to structure all that and whatever thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
But you can't, with a friend, sit down and talk to that friend for an hour a week about your stuff and focused on helping you and have no other interactions and just do that and for that to last indefinitely.
Mm-hmm.
Because for a relationship to be sustainable, there has to be a roughly equivalent give and take.
Yeah.
If one person is consistently getting more and the other person's consistently giving more, eventually that relationship falls apart.
Mm-hmm.
That's part of why, if you think about like when you consider talking to a friend about your problems, even when you're doing it, there's often a little sense, and the longer the time goes on, that sense gets stronger of like, I can't go on forever. I don't want to burden them, whatever.
Yeah.
It's not always accurate by any means,
Mm-hmm.
but that sense is a built-in sense that's based on the reality of if a relationship is imbalanced for too much for too long, it does fall apart.
Yeah.
So in order for there to be a relationship where the structure of it is focused on improving one person's experience,
Mm-hmm.
there has to be then some other thing going in the other direction. And payment doesn't have to be money, but that's primarily what we utilize.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a certain amount. There's all kinds of different ways to structure this. But the basic idea of in this interaction, we're all focused on you. And so there's got to be something outside of the interaction that's going from you in the other direction.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, it's unsustainable, leads to resentment.
I just saw the time and I have to go.
Yeah, we need to wrap up. This was fun. Good to be with you.
I really appreciate it.
Good to be with you all.
Yeah.
Yeah, good times.
It was nice. I've heard you talk about disease versus disorder a lot, but I feel like there was something about today where my attention was, I don't know if it was more like focused or in a different way, but it's kind of fun to like talk about similar. It almost reminds me of a really, really, really good book where you read it and you're like, I like this book. I remember parts of it. And then you read it again and you're like, whoa, there's these other parts of the book and they're great too.
It's kind of a callback to what we were saying at the beginning. Like,
Mm-hmm.
that's how communication works, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, yeah, I'm specifically and deliberately doing this thing right now where I'm rereading books I haven't read in over 10 years.
Oh, fun.
Because I'm having these wild experiences of like, I can remember the like visualization of what this place looked like, or and then I read it again with a whole different visualization. And it's strange to have those two things. Like I can picture both.
You're time traveling.
Anyway, this is good. This is fun. Good to be with y'all.
Yeah, it was really nice.
We'll be
Thank you
back
for
same
your
time next
comments.
week. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.